Mr. President, millions of American kids in the public school system have been robbed of a year and counting of anything resembling a proper education. It's been a historically tough year. That's why Americans are so excited. Our nation appears to be approaching a major turning point. Here are just a few recent headlines. A U.S. vaccine surge is coming, with millions of doses promised. Another headline, America's vaccine rollout has been among the best in the world. Another headline, CDC finds scant spread of coronavirus in schools with precautions in place. Here's one from my home state. COVID-19 cases plummet in Kentucky nursing homes, a key target for the vaccine. So let's take a look at the economy. U.S. retail sales surprise with sharpest advance in 7 months. Blue-collar jobs boom as COVID-19 boosts housing, e-commerce demand. Another headline, consumer demand snaps back, factories can't keep up. So to be clear, this isn't over. The battle's not won yet, but the day is approaching when we'll be able to end this defensive crouch and safely reclaim our normal lives. Last year, the Senate built the largest peacetime fiscal expansion in American history. We spent $4 trillion on 5 overwhelmingly bipartisan packages. The most recent just became law 2 months ago. Funding for hospitals and providers kept our health care system above water. The Paycheck Protection Program saved Main Street small businesses. Direct relief and extra unemployment aid helped working families endure the shutdowns. Operation Warp Speed laid the groundwork for our historic sprint toward vaccinations. These were strong, bipartisan policies targeted at what families specifically needed to wage the war. But today, Democrats are steamrolling ahead with a massive spending plan on a completely partisan basis. They did not receive a single House Republican vote in committee yesterday because their partisan plan is not targeted toward helping Americans reclaim their lives and their country from this invader. Instead, here's what it is: a combination of miscellaneous, non-COVID-related liberal wish list items and the kinds of Band-Aid policies that make a defensive crouch slightly less painful, but don't help us get back on offense. Let's take a look at K-12 schooling. Until very recently, the new administration's own scientists had been crystal clear. Earlier this month, CDC Director Rochelle Walensky said, quote, "There is increasing data to suggest that schools can safely reopen." A major CDC study found in-person schooling does not fuel community transmission. Last month, Dr. Fauci said it's less likely for a child to get infected in the school setting than if they were just in the community. But big labor special interests didn't appreciate science undercutting their political goals. The empire struck back, and the Democratic leaders who loved to claim the mantle of science ran away from the science as fast as they could. Now the CDC director admits that, quote, "the lived experiences," whatever that is, "of government employees got between the hard science and the final guidance." Gets a lot of points for candor. The unions had spoken. The goalposts were on the move. And the White House keeps endorsing the idea that schools need the Democrats' new spending plan to reopen when the science disagrees. And furthermore, just 5% of what they propose to spend on schools would even be spent this year. Let me say that again. In this big COVID package, only 5% of what they propose to spend on schools would be spent this year. In other words, the spend out is over years ahead. You would think their view is we're never going to get over the coronavirus. The United Kingdom just announced they'll have kids back in school in less than 2 weeks. Countries like Spain and France have had kids in classrooms for months already. The European Center for Disease Prevention has no problem affirming the science that closing schools is, quote, unlikely to provide significant additional protection of children's health. Even here at home, private and religious schools have been teaching kids in person for months without causing any explosion in the spread of the virus. Science tells us unambiguously that in-person schooling can be quite safe, and that having young children spend all day staring into a laptop is a nightmare. The evidence is crystal clear. Big labor bureaucrats keep refusing to follow the science. In my hometown of Louisville, our union-backed school board vice chairman now asserts, with no evidence, I think we're probably likely to see better instructional outcomes if we stay remote for the rest of the school year. Ridiculous. No facts, no evidence, just a personal whim. These are the people controlling our kids' futures and their parents' lives. One anonymous teacher told reporters, quote, "We already have a schedule and a routine going. We don't need to be babysitting for 6 weeks because parents are upset." Let me say that again. One anonymous teacher told reporters, "We already have a schedule and a routine going. We don't need to be babysitting for 6 weeks because parents are upset." So, by the way, failing grades in middle schools are up 388% in our country. Failing grades in middle schools are up 388% in our country while these kids are stuck at home. The Biden administration has a clear obligation to tackle the special interest madness head on. Our kids are suffering, not because science says they must be, it doesn't, just because a small group of powerful grown-ups have decided they prefer it this way. Instead, the White House keeps parroting the anti-science myths. They back this notion that schools need the Democrats' new spending plan before they can reopen. Except that science completely disagrees, completely. Except that only a tiny fraction of the funding request would even be spent this fiscal year. Our children's futures are literally at stake. The administration's got to stop taking orders from the public sector unions that give generously to Democratic campaigns. This is Exhibit A in why relief legislation must be targeted to the actual needs that we face now. American families should be the starting point, not preconceived political priorities.